Excerpt from the 717th Contact Report of April 4, 2019 Part 2, translated with deepl.com. Disclaimer: this is an unofficial translation. Source:
Zeitzeichen
127 on page 1 to 6.
Rest of the prediction of Faith at the Contact Report of Saturday, June 14, 1947.
The way you see it, that's your business. But now I have to say that I have to mention what my father explained to you at the end of his predictions, which was meant for your safety and information. The records show the following.
From Contact Report 717 of 4th of April 2019.
Now I address Persia again, especially because this country will have a special meaning for you, because you will receive a new name there, as you will in West Pakistan a few years later. In addition, you will make some very important connections in Persia, but in some cases you will have to keep silence about them for your whole life, because they would destroy your later mission politically and religiously and would also violently end your life. This is in addition to the fact that in many other ways religious believers who have gone astray, as well as certain organized forces and individuals who rise up against you in hatred and envy, also from your direct proximity, will try hatefully to put an end to your life. Also, if you have established your own family, it will become that out of it a malicious web of lies will emerge against you, and this will be because you will not act senselessly against the truth, but will do your job correctly and will not put in the foreground a particular member of your family who will demand to be granted special rights, but that will not lie in your behavior, because you grant all people the same rights and legitimacy as you have learned. From this will arise from this family member senseless hatred against you, from which also outrageous lies, slander, stupidity, deceitfulness and seductions will emerge. And then by means of further lies and deception these will also be transferred to other and gullible family members, who will carelessly accept the lies, slander and false accusations as truth. Ultimately you will be betrayed, insulted and falsely accused by your family, even when you are joined by stupidly hostile elements from around the world. In the end, only your older, rational son will stick with you, while the other members will viciously spread their untruths and slander throughout the world, unscrupulously and shamelessly, with the help of journals, newspapers, radio, and various newly emerging technical means of information. You will be maliciously and vengefully insulted and slanderously defiled in order to accuse yourself of unscrupulously manipulated false accusations and thereby make yourself appear dishonorable, unfair and extremely remote. In some cases you will suffer severe physical damage in your life, but you will be able to cope with and control it by your own strength. But in many cases you will also remain unharmed by favorable coincidences. About the now mentioned and still many other things of your forthcoming life I will have to explain to you however at a later time in detail still some things and to teach you also special rules of conduct. Much will also be related to your connections that you will enter into in Persia and that you will have to carry with you until your old age, but which, as I said, will demand lifelong secrecy from you. But all this is also the reason why I have to address various things and explain what will largely happen in Persia. In Persia in 1963 you will be compared in the capital Tehran by an American woman with a young American man named Billy the Kid, who became a legend, which is why you will henceforth bear the name Billy, and this will spread worldwide through your fulfillment of duty of your specially agreed vocation. In the Persian, Arabic, Afghan, Indian and Pakistani areas you will be called Phantom in certain circles, but you will only have to wear this name for as long as you are in the countries concerned and secretly work for 3 different government leaders and for some police forces. In this context, however, you will also experience great suffering, as this will break down for you in Iraq, Algeria and India. In 17 years you will also suffer a great physical impairment in fulfilling your obligation in Turkey, just as later in your life there will be several more serious physical afflictions, but all of which you will overcome through your own efforts and powers. However, we will not talk about this today, but at a later date. It is only worth mentioning today that your second official name will be Muhammad Abdullah, and you will receive it in 1965 in western Pakistan in the city of Karachi, which will become known in the countries I have mentioned, but will quickly be forgotten again when you will finally return to your homeland. Persia will become even more important in your life, but I will explain more about it later. Today it is only worth mentioning that you, in addition to all the terrible atrocities you have witnessed with me in your life so far with regard to warfare and vicious war crimes, massacres and much more, have to observe and witness various other human degenerations at close quarters, because only by doing so can you ultimately become the person you must be in order to fulfill your duty. This will also affect executions of state leaders who are overthrown. This means that my successor will teach you in the same way that I did and will continue to teach you for a few more years. Some of your future learning will take place in Persia, where you will also make the acquaintance of the emperor. Before years later, in 1979, he will be overthrown by an Islamic revolution under the command of an Islamic sectarian,
Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, ending the monarchy and the emperor fleeing Persia.
But I will also teach you about this and many other things at a later date, as well as about some things that you will have to deal with in Turkey. So I will now begin by obliging you, as with all earlier similar declarations, to remain silent in every way, for what I have to make clear to you now must not go out into the world in this century, but only when everything has happened and a certain time has passed in the next millennium. If you would not stick to your silence, then you would endanger your life with it, because the USA still in this year and effectively in less than 3 months will establish a secret service, which will cause a lot of trouble until far into the third millennium worldwide and thus also in Persia. With what I have to teach you, I will now begin. The year 1953 will be that for me, because I will go my last way and another person will accompany and instruct you. But it will also be the time when the first freely elected Prime Minister,
Muhammad Mossadegh, will be overthrown by a military coup in the Empire of Persia and executed in later years, 2 decades from now. The emperor, that is, Shah, will lose his power in the country, whereby the Secret Service of the USA, which will be brought into being, the Central Intelligence Agency, which will be called in short CIA, will bring energetically their intrigues into Persia, which carries the designation Iran since 1934. Iran equals the 1930 for ruling Shah Reza Pahlavi ordered that the state Persia lose its traditional name and be renamed Iran, which refers to the Second World War. The first tribes were bloody, barbaric and massacring and slaughtered the indigenous people of the past and in this way conquered the area and made it their central settlement area. The country was then named by the conquerors according to the ancient tribal federation north of the Persian Gulf, Persis, which is expressed in German as Persia. If the name Iran is dissected, then it derives from the Old Persian, Alt-Farsi, Bum-Aryan equals land of the Aryans, as the history of the Old Persian Empire currently shows from 539 BC Manual, CHR. When Babylon was taken and the new Babylonian Empire of the Chaldeans was defeated.
This Secret Service of the USA, the CIA, will already become active worldwide shortly after the foundation-causing disaster, also in Persia, as I already said, and which I do not want to call different and therefore not Iran. This CIA will secretly settle very quickly in Persia and operate a secret operational base, first without the knowledge of the Shah, the population in the world, and consequently the entire population and military of the United States will have no idea of it. So also the Shah will not know anything about it at first, but only when he falls into the clutches of the CIA, which will be when he will have his own and useful Persian Secret Service trained by them in the manner of the American. However, the Persian people will not learn anything about this either, because the fact that Secret Service personnel of the Shah will then be trained in Persia will be concealed from the people, because this will be strictly monitored and harassed by the emerging Persian Secret Service, which will then also execute government officials and civilians. The truth is that, in addition to the British Secret Service Secret Intelligence Service, SIS, which was founded as early as 1909, the aforementioned emerging Secret Service of the USA, the CIA, will cause great and multiple disasters and spread terror far into the third millennium through agents in many countries of the world, as well as committing many violent crimes worldwide. This Secret Service, like no other, will be decisive and responsible for many future vicious and terrible world events, such as insurrections, wars, political assassinations, terror and many other crimes, as it will be decisive and responsible for political intrigues in Persia, but will be kept so secret that only the highest chiefs of the CIA and, of course, those directly involved will be informed. And this will also be the case regarding the fact that the CIA etc. and the British Secret Service will be involved in the coup that will take place in Persia in 1953. This will be the case, just as the CIA and the SIS will be responsible for all future political and military events in Persia, but this will also be so related with regard to an Islamic revolution that will take place in 1979. Whereby the CIA in particular will be involved in this matter. American and British Secret Services will therefore secretly support the coup, and will do so undoubtedly, as I have seen from future shivers, and as I know, the CIA will even organize and lead this coup itself, using the dormant state of war, Billy, Cold War, and the oil for all sorts of intrigues and business. That the Secret Service of the USA, the CIA, will be right not only to almost, but to every malicious, treacherous, infamous, contemptuous of life as well as degenerate means imaginable in order to assert, defend as well as of course preserve the political, military, secret service as well as economic interests of the USA in the Third World, that is already absolutely unquestionable. That there will be no hesitation in overthrowing the state, assassinations, torture and murder of people, nor in destroying important facilities, etc., will mean absolute comprehensibility and reasonableness for the CIA, and what has been planned for Persia in this respect since the end of the World War by the rulers of the USA, already since then completely secret and known only to the top ruling elite of the USA. Is a secret, underground and politically disruptive work of the American leaders who want to bring Persia to their side, for which the emerging Secret Service CIA is to be used. The reason for this will on the one hand be the fear and cowardice of the USA that Persia could sooner or later become a vassal state of the Soviet Union. On the other hand, it is also feared that the already prematurely worked out secret plans of the U.S. rulers to gain possession of the Persian oil fields, which are currently still under the British rule of APAC, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, could fail due to intrigues of the soon-to-be-established CIA Secret Service. The plans of the USA and all interest groups to seize the Persian oil fields are opposed by President Harry S. Truman, who has been in office since 1945. Truman does not correspond to an abbreviation for a second first name, because it is merely an initial that corresponds to the name of his two grandfathers Anderson Ship Truman and Solomon Young, who will continue in office until 1953 and who is also responsible for the 2 atomic bomb drops on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, by which hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians were murdered unscrupulously. Furthermore, it is assumed by the responsible U.S. leaders, The xenophobia of the Persian population could sooner or later lead to the expropriation of the British company and denationalization of the oil fields, which will actually happen at a later date. But the USA and also the British want to prevent this, which is why everything is being done, and also in the future, so that the oil can continue to be produced by British, French and American companies. There is currently no danger of the oil fields being nationalized, but this will soon be within reach when the first Prime Minister comes to power, who will be freely elected. Further, it will result in the next years that the Shah will develop his secret service ever further, and he will suppress by this any opposition in completely Persian in violent way. Nevertheless, he will not be able to prevent a revolution from breaking out in 1979, and he will be disgracefully deposed and Persia will be transformed into an Islamic republic. In this respect, a Ruhollah Khomeini will be made a symbolic figure in the 1960s and will make a name for himself, only to be elevated to the status of revolutionary leader, which will come later. What will happen, however, refers to many things, as well as to the fact that everything coming to Persia in the coming decades will have an impact on the religiousness of the Persian population, in the relationship that many will begin to be disappointed by their Islamic religion already in a decade from now on, assuming for it the problem in Islam itself. As a result, religion will increasingly play a lesser role in the lives of the Persian population, especially in the large cities, while it will play a lesser role in the countryside. But what will lead to it, I could see from my future looks, because these let me see that an Islamic revolution is inevitable and will emerge from multi-layered interest groups and lead to the deposition of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi in 1979, and thus also to the end of the monarchy in Persia. The symbolic figure Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, whom I mentioned, will then proclaim his concept of the state from 1979 onwards against further revolutionary and secular groups by proclaiming the reign of a spirituality and status of legal scholars and asserting it with evil force and proclaiming himself as the new religious head of state. It will also be he who will lead the first emerging demonstrations against the Shah, whom you will also get to know and later secretly meet him again and explain various things to him. What I have said about the Persian people's belief that it will bring about a change in Islam, it will lose its old form in Persia, as it will later do in other Islamic states, because it will be institutionalized and politicized, which will spread to much of all Arab and Islam-dominated countries and their populations and lead to insurrections against their dictatorial leaders. However, the beginning for this was already set years ago and will be continued in 1963, because then in Persia a freedom movement will start to fight the reform program of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, which will be founded already in 2 years, i.e., in 1949, by a freedom movement, which is to prevent then above all the introduction of the women's right to vote and the abolition of the large landed property. The secret services of Britain and the USA will then also be involved in secretly preparing a coup against the emperor and supporting his fall. But then the USA will interfere so openly in Persian politics, led by the president,
Jimmy Carter,
of the USA, that a political liberalization can take place in 1977, which will then revive the demonstrations initiated by Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini in 1978. In 1978, organized strikes will paralyze Persia's economy, and the freedom movement I mentioned will be supportive and ultimately lead to the Shah fleeing the country in January 1979 and finally leaving it. Only 2 weeks later, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, who was already deported abroad in 1964 as a revolt threatening the state and found asylum in France, will return from his exile to Tehran. After that the monarchy will be abolished, but only in order to convert it into a strict Islamic republic with the help of the Secret Service of the USA, which is like a religious sect and characterized by religious fanaticism. whereby secretly with the USA also an early nuclear treaty will be negotiated for the emission of nuclear weapons, but all this will also draw circles into the Arab world, in which the United States of America will interfere everywhere and bring in its claims to power, whereby Saudi Arabia in particular will be in the foreground of the desire, and this will continue well into the third millennium, through political and intelligence hypocrisy, intrigues, lies and fraud, etc. The U.S. will gain the false trust of Saudi rulers and sell them weapons systems and vast quantities of weapons, making Saudi Arabia a dangerous military power in the Middle East and an unpredictable permanent threat to Persia.
There have been religious differences between Persia and Saudi Arabia for centuries, because Persia is religiously Shiite, while Saudi Arabia is Sunni. The main reason for hostility is based on the fact that Islamic religious delusion in the Gulf region is about the supremacy of true faith. This means that between Persia and Saudi Arabia the age-old conflict division with regard to Islam in Sunnis and Shiites is because the Prophet Muhammad did not appoint a successor. And, like no true prophet from the Nockademian line has ever done. The Saudi main and state religion is founded in its Sunni Wahhabi coinage in Hanbalitic Islam, and this is in hostility to the state religion of the Shiite Persians with their Shia of 12, whereby this Shia of 12 corresponds to a Shiite group, which originated in the early 10th century in Iraq and according to whose doctrine there are 12 imams, whereby the last of them is supposed to live in secrecy, but at the end of time will return to rule in justice. Like other Muslims, the Sunnis believe in the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad and the Quran. They privately pray to Allah 5 times a day, and on Friday they meet in the mosque for common prayer, not believing in the imams as legitimate successors to Muhammad, unlike the Shiites, most of whom pray only 3 times a day. The Shiites claim that Ali ibn Abi Talib, Muhammad's nephew and son-in-law, is his legitimate successor, because allegedly only this Ali or his sons were allowed to become successors of the Prophet Muhammad. Contrarily, the Sunnis demand the election from the tribe of Muhammad, therefore the successor did not have to be a family member. Muhammad's confidant Abu Bakr, whom the Shiites do not recognize, is named as the first caliph. Indeed, all Muslims refer to the Quran as the most important source of their faith, as also Christians do with regard to the Bible and also all other religions with their holy books, as well as in varying degrees to deeds and sayings of the Prophet, the Sunnah, respectively to the totality of all allegedly handed down sayings, behavior and actions of the Prophet Muhammad, which are regarded as a guiding principle of Muslim way of life. But we have to bear in mind that the Sunnah was also invented and written by scribes over the course of time and thus very long after Muhammad, just as it was the case with the Quran, the Bible and the New Testament, to which it is fraudulently lied that it is a matter of the Prophet's effective and true speeches, sayings, behavior and actions etc.
In Persia itself, in the coming decades well into the third millennium, on the one hand it will be about religious faith, as I already mentioned, because the authorities will be delusional and faith-obsessed religious leaders. On the other hand, Persia will fall into decline as a result of uncontrollable purely political, power, financial and economic affairs, just as most people in large cities will begin to lose their sectarian belief in the religious character of the Islamic Republic as early as the early 1980s. All this will then carry itself far into the third millennium, whereby people will completely give up their faith in the religious Islamic Republic, because the believers will recognize the truth and the actual evil machinations of the religious leaders, which will be hidden in the cloak of the Islamic Republic, and in this cloak there will be nothing good, but everything else and only religiously sprawling, which will turn out to be malicious terror of the rulers and their henchmen, and just as criminal abuse of office will be unparalleled, as also murder and coercion supported by religious faith, and everything will be paired with corruption and abuse of power, religious terror and deadly punishment and violence against wrongdoing believers. There will also be mismanagement, which will dominate the country. As for decades, Persia and its population will be harassed and blackmailed by the USA through coercive measures, for which punishments and means of pressure,
sanctions,
will be enforced, through which the most diverse demands for USA wills will then be forced. The religious rulers and all rulers in the name of religion in Persia will be just as corrupt as the rulers of the USA, who in the future want to enforce their demands in Persia by coercive measures, because they will all be equal, also in their lying and deceitful false religiosity, which they will already have internalized in their childhood in their falsehood. And if today, tomorrow and in the coming times of the third millennium the attitudes of the statesmen and their like-minded in the governments of the USA and Persia are examined in detail, as I have done, then it results that their entire behavior on the one hand is directed only to their self-glory and power over their peoples, as well as to enormous assets and their lying faith in a God and his protection for them, and will also be so in the far future, today, as tomorrow, and in the near future in the USA. It is also about getting access to Persia's raw materials, for which even war will not shy away if there is no other possibility of getting access to the very large and extensive earth resources in Persia. These resources are particularly important for the USA, as they will be in the future, because they are the largest consumers of all earth resources due to their unjustified wars based on world domination and political military interference in foreign countries. Also with regard to the immense raw materials of Persia. For this reason, the USA will not allow itself to creep into the states of the oil-rich Middle East until well into the third millennium in order to create a supremacy for itself. The United States of America had already selected the oil-rich states around the Persian Gulf, especially Persia, Saudi Arabia and Iraq, before the last World War, in order to sneak hypocritically into them for the sake of the earth petroleum, to intervene threateningly if necessary, or to reach the set goal by coercive measures or war.
I can only vaguely remember the whole thing. But I have something else. Your father Sfeth has asked me to spread his predictions around the world. But he has also said that I myself must strive to make and spread predictions through my own abilities. That's what I did, several times in the 1950s, 1960s and 1970s, partly resorting to his predictions, but also making my own probability calculations and predictions from them and sending them to governments, radio stations, newspapers and some organizations, which however was almost water into the Rhine, just without any resonance. So I wonder if I should still calculate something again and make a prediction. It wouldn't have to be much, but it would have to be something specific. How do you feel about that?
This is an idea you should realize.
Good, then I will do it. But it will probably be the same as before, that the whole thing will not penetrate those places where it should.
With the unreasonableness that prevails among all those decisively responsible, both the public media and those in power, it will certainly be so. But now, Edward, I've been here a long time,